Well, this is Friday morning after the rigors of the week, Pat. We've had Ray Bassett on Wednesday, and we had our usual, what would we call it, intelligence fest on Monday.
Yeah. Yes. What do you call it? Was it Wallace and Gromit? I don't know what the hell they call us, but anyway,
I once said to Malachy, what's Malachy's name?
O'Doherty.
Malachy, with an I. Malachy, I said to him that we should really set up and act as Wallace and Gromit, because in fact, all his views were totally different to mine, in fact. So, if we were doing Wallace and Gromit, I think our views would be much closer than that. Anyway, he talked about it, but he didn't follow through, as is the case in many instances. Anyway, very stormy weather up there, I gather, Pat.
Jude, this morning, I have got accused all the time of looking out the windows as me and you, Chuck. But Jude, as I've told you on many occasions, I live in North Donegal, and we definitely get a different climate up here. Jude, it's just seriously bad this morning. Like the ones howling out there, and I'm wondering how long the electricity is going to last, even for this recording. Because
we see a tidal wave coming in your window and washing
Jude, by the way, I'm sure you didn't see it, but I did. There was a thing on social media yesterday. A ship coming into port somewhere in Germany, and the water. It was a ferry, and it actually came through the windows at the front of the ferry. A sort of rogue wave. So it's serious. Judd, here's a serious question. Changing the subject totally. Well, it's not changing the subject, but let's move the subject on. Do you seriously think we are taking climate change seriously enough?
Well, certainly when you hear the weather forecast, I mean, this thing about the weather comes from the reports we've been getting, all like RTE and BBC and all the rest of them, Sky. The weather forecasters showing us these frightening charts with, orange and then red. You don't see red very often. Yeah. Well, there's no doubt that the climate is certainly changing. And I think, as you pointed out earlier to me before we come on, that it's changing not so much to snow and ice as to wind and rain, for which I'm very grateful, because I got my belly full of snow and ice when I was in Canada. But are we taking it seriously enough? Well, I think it's like mask wearing, Pat. I think we can. I think in some respects we're being told voluntarily we should all do our own bit. We all should contribute, get our houses insulated. Don't use gas, don't use diesel, don't use petrol. Get an electric car, etc. On the other hand, there's the mandatory, and presumably that's things like we're not allowed to use. I think we're not. Are we allowed to use coal now?
But it has to be smokeless coal.
Smokeless coal. So there is a degree of the mandatory. I think, I'll say, answer your question. Do I think we're taking it seriously enough? The answer is no, if we look at our actions. People tend to say, yes, it's bloody awful, and clearly the thing's going to come down on us, and it's going to be terrible for the planet. But ask them to do something, or to have a law passed saying it must happen. And most people say, come on, look, it's going to cost me a fortune to do that. I can't afford that. I'm only getting by as things are. So I worry a wee bit. And again, because I'm essentially a fascist, I am in favour of the mandatory.
Yeah, well, no, right here, we have had 2 storms in basically a week, which I think is highly, highly unusual. Eunice and Dudley. And this last fortnight, I would say, of the last, 14 days, 10 of them have been dominated by heavy winds, or at least they're in this part of the island of Ireland, because every time I seem to go out the door, there's something flying around. Now, Jude, I don't remember weather like this, and it is very strange. Like, Jude, when you think about it down south, down by Cork and Waterford and so on, they are expecting winds somewhere in the region of 90 miles an hour. Now, they've got a red wind warning. Jude, that's not funny. That means damage. That means your roof coming off, trees blowing down, and so on. Dude, we don't normally, and by the way, it's becoming a regular occurrence.
Yes, and schools are being kept off. So there's another parallel.
My son's a school teacher, and he has schools closed today. There's all the schools in Donegal are closed today.
When's the last time you heard that happening?
during the pandemic was it
pandemic,
shouldn't
but
be it shouldn't
not,
it shouldn't be
not for
it
weather
shouldn't be a
reasons.
weather event.
No,
It shouldn't be a
exactly, not
weather
for
event.
weather.
Yeah.
So
No.
of course, it's shockingly important. I get a bit of grief sometimes when I say, oh, well, we shouldn't do that because that's bad for the environment.
Yeah.
And my wife says, God's sake, have a bit of sense.
Yeah.
It's hard to jerk us out of our usual pattern of behavior.
Yeah.
And even though the evidence is there in front of our eyes, we find it hard to do it. Sometimes we find it hard financially. Sometimes we
Yeah.
find it hard because it's just force of habit.
Yeah.
And again, I think government should be far more interventionist. I think they're afraid to intervene because it might affect their poll ratings. It might affect them
Yeah.
being elected the next time. But if they
Yeah.
care about their grandchildren, as you'd care about your grandchildren, and I care about
Yeah.
mine, then they should be doing their utmost. And they are the lawmakers. So I
Yeah.
urge them to act on it. Would you
Yeah.
accept that argument, Pat, or am I too
So what's certainly the only thing, Judy, you've rightly pointed out, is all this the Green Party and the Republic now they've introduced quite a few things, and the cost of living in regard to fuel and heating, on top of the worldwide stuff about gas prices going up and fuel price, like the carbon charges and all the rest of it added. So they're becoming extremely unpopular at the minute because of inflation and stuff, and people are struggling. Jude, there's no doubt about it, that their cost, the rising costs of heating and eating are phenomenal.
So what's to be done about that? I mean, whenever we were faced with the possibility of, hundreds, thousands, God knows how many, even up to millions of people here dying in Ireland, we acted. The government acted. And they closed things down and they put in rules and they said you must have masks and so on. So they really acted because it was so urgent. Now we're talking about the future of the planet, and it is so patently urgent.
Yeah.
But there's people aren't doing it, they're not doing it. No. And I take your point about people being strapped. You hear reports from, especially around Dublin, where people just simply haven't got enough food to put on the table. Which is shocking. But couldn't the government intervene in the same way it intervened whenever the lockdown occurred?
Yeah, Jude, there's been quite a few programs quite recently. I've seen, I've heard on radio and seen on TV programs about absolute poverty, about people now actually talking. But these are working people, Jude. These are not people on the dole. These are people saying, like, I am working and I'm getting paid, but we're going to food banks and we're in dire need. The cost of electricity's gone up so high, the cost of gas has gone up so high, and if you need your car to get to work, Jude, I have this habit, Jude, I pull into a fuel station and I get 20 euros. That's what I've been doing for years. Every time I notice, right, put another 20 euros. Jude, now I noticed when I put in 20 euros, I'm back at about 2 days later. It used to be when you put in 20 euros, because I don't do a massive amount of, so it was just topping it up. I mightn't be back for 4 or 5 days. Now I'm back every second day, and that's a fact.
So are you saying, Pat, that people are finding it so hard to get past, there's really nothing that can be done, even though we know that the climate crisis is something that's going to...
Well, the government's going to turn around. Well, in the Republic, I can't speak for everybody else, but I heard Pascal Donoghue, the Minister of Finance, on the other day, and he says, look, folks, we owe 250 billion thanks to the economic crisis. We just can't pick up a tab for everything. So he says, that there's a health service, there's education, and during the COVID, they had the unemployment payment, which added, I think, another 50 or 60 billion over the 2 or 3 years. Now, the exports were up, so I don't think it was as bad as projected. But a lot of people were getting paid 300 and something 50 euros a week who weren't working. So money is finite, I suppose.
Well, you see, you just said money is finite, and I agree completely. But, if you were to say the world is going to be destroyed, but, it would cost an awful lot to save it, you would laugh at that and say, God's sake, forget it.
You can't eat money.
But there'd be a public reaction to that. And I think politicians are not taking it seriously. I'll be honest with you. I think the Green Party, God help them, because they're going to be the bad guys. They're going to be the guys who made life tough for people in the South. And yet they're acting, I think, honestly, that they're acting for the good of the planet.
Well, do you remember those old American Indians says when the last tree stops giving out air, and when the rivers stop running, you'll realize then you can't eat money.
Exactly, exactly. I just think it's unfortunate because, I mean, even Sinn Féin, who, was highly critical of the Southern government, they also are, I think, against carbon tax at some point, are they? Is
Yeah,
that
they
right?
are. Well, I think Pierce Doherty says in the current climate, piling
No
on,
pun intended.
none. He says piling on other charges is just not realistic, and there's an element of truth in it.
Yeah, well,
Anyway,
it
Jude,
is.
we've
It
given
is.
that a
It
fair
is.
old
But I
bash.
mean, government could pony up and give people subsidies. They did it during the pandemic. That's my point. And they did the fact, whether you like it or not, that the only thing that trumps the pandemic is climate.
Yes, I agree, but
even worse.
but we're back into the reality of economics. But anyway, we've
I
this one
think in the end it comes down to political courage, and I think our party. I suppose if you're in those shoes, you would be also maybe a wee bit lacking in courage. You'd be careful about putting stuff up if you're going to go to face the electorate. But I still think it's almost a moral question. Are you going to do the right thing, whatever the cost? Okay, let's move on to our second story, Pat. It's from RTE. And you noted it because, was it an Amnesty report that said...
There was an Amnesty report earlier this month. I've heard it discussed and so on. Jude, one of the things now, it seems to be that if you criticize Israel whatsoever, you're being anti-Semitic. Now, the Amnesty report has come out and said there's apartheid in South Africa in Israel. And it's very clear and says, and actually I got a thing this morning, I just read it in the journal about saying that basically what they're saying is, start again, Pat, that Amnesty is getting attacked as being peddling anti-Semitism because of reports like this. And they're saying that some of the criticism is ridiculous. But Jude, right away, they said the Israeli government, before the report was even published, I wrote it down somewhere, where they claimed the report was false, biased, and anti-Semitic before the report was even published. Now, talk about getting your
retaliation in first.
You're attacking before as a method of defense. But no, Jude, there seems to be some sort of alliance across the right wing and America and Britain and France and so on. Don't say anything about Israel, even though the evidence of apartheid is overwhelming. Amnesty says there's 11 human rights organizations, even within Israel, saying the Israeli government has questions to answer about in regard to their treatment of the Palestinians. But right away, the American lawmakers right away have all rejected it and sort of accused them of bias and so on. And you sort of go, wait a minute. When it was in South Africa, the whole world united. And the other thing, of course, Jude, I should point out, it was going through my head. That's why I was getting slightly confused. See when Amnesty does a report on China and human rights, or in Russia on human rights, or Belarus or somewhere like that, the reports are welcomed by Washington and London and Westminster and Paris and so on. But the minute it crosses over when into Israel, then suddenly it's Amnesty is a left-wing, biased sort of thing. And you sort of go, wait a minute, if it was okay one way, why is the sort of the model changed?
Well, you see, Pat, my view is that once you get down to these kinds of things, you're not really talking in rational terms, you're talking in emotional terms. And the fact is that there are a lot of Jews in the US who identify with Israel because they're Jewish. And you can understand that in a way, that they know what happened during the Second World War with the Nazis, and they know that the state of Israel is precarious in the sense that it's surrounded by enemies, or at least people who don't subscribe to their view of things. So you can kind of understand in a way the average Jew in say the States who says, my country, right or wrong. That's the way they would look at it. And anybody who's going to make any criticism of my country, you step off, clear off. Look at the situation we're in. Look at what happened to us in the Second World War. Don't tell us how to run the thing. We're running it the way we want to. So you can sort of understand it. But in another way, it's sort of monstrous. Here are the Jewish people who have suffered so much during the Second World War, with 6 million killed in gas chambers. And what do when they set up their own state? They proceed to persecute. Persecute, that's what they're doing. Now, these guys are in open air prison, Palestinians. They persecute this minority to a degree.
And of course, Jude, what they try to do is saying, oh blame Hamas.
Well, that sounds familiar too, doesn't it? I mean, you remember whenever they had the the law of detention here, where anybody could be picked up on the word of a cop. Well, it was the same thing, blame
the IRA.
Yeah, exactly. This danger, so you had to get protection from it. It's a difficult subject, but I would like you to get really mad. And I mean, the greatest example of it recently was Jeremy Corbyn, your friend that was sitting where you're sitting now, Jeremy Corbyn. They trumped up this rubbish about him being anti-Semitic. And you know that he's no more anti-Semitic than Barry Michael Duff was bigot. Neither of the two things are true, but they just managed to slap the label onto him, and they destroyed Corbyn's career, and they certainly stopped Barry Michael Duff's career as an MLA. And it's sort of disgusting in a way. It really is. It's using a reasonable grievance that I suppose you could say people have, and slapping it onto people so that they can be knocked out.
Yeah, Jude, and then just there was an interesting one, and we probably should move on. But you brought up Corbyn there. Corbyn's track record is possibly the most anti-racist person in the entire parliament. He's a track record of standing up for minorities going back 40 years. He was actually his parents took part in the East End of London, and when it was unpopular to do so, against racism against Jews. He has got a track record. And then when you sit down, and some of the people accusing him of anti-Semitism, their track record as bigots and racists, you sort of go, in other words, I always said, remember John Kerry lost the American election against George Bush, and one of the big attacks on him was about his record of Vietnam. And I always thought, at least he went to Vietnam. George Bush didn't. So how did he lose that? Jeremy Corbyn always remains the man who fought against anti-Semitism as the one who's accused of it.
Well, the people in the Labour Party who said that anti-Semitism was a problem and accused Jeremy Corbyn of, harboring this grievance. Yesterday, I tweeted it because it just struck me. I can't remember the name of the woman. She's the deputy leader of the Labour Party.
Angela Rayner.
Angela Rayner came out with a statement yesterday where she said, in my book, I want them to shoot terrorists first and ask questions after. How absurd, how ridiculous.
That sounds like, you described yourself as a fascist. That's the sort of thing a fascist would come out of. That sounds like the old colonel and hanging them and flogging them.
Oh yeah, Colonel Blimp. Colonel Blimp. Well, we had plenty of that here too, of course, Okay, let's move on from that sad story to another story that's in a way sad, I suppose, and it's in the Irish News. You said that I didn't see this now, but 4 out of 5 accountants.
Apparently, and the Irish News, no, I didn't get a chance to read it in depth, but apparently the survey said in the Irish News that, Jeffrey came out about 10 days ago when he launched his big speech while he was bringing down the protocol. He came out with this one that the protocol was costing 2.5 million a day in Northern Ireland and 100,000 an hour, and this cannot continue and all the rest of it. Now, I remember watching Andy McLafferty on BBC, the BBC's Northern Ireland political editor, and he said, these figures are disputed. I didn't realise how much they were disputed. Apparently, they're based on an extrapolation by Esmond Birney, who's a former UUP guy, or a unionist anyway, who looked at the 4 firms in Northern Ireland and so on. Now, the Journal is an electronic sort of newspaper in the Republic, and they do fact checks, and they said they went after this, and they said they rang up the DUP and asked them to give them the evidence of where they were getting this, and the DUP. By the way, they said they went several times, but they got no response. So they started doing their own digging, and they said there's a whole lot of things wrong. First of all, it was based apparently on 4 firms. It certainly didn't take into account the pluses of or no, 4 other firms. These were 4 particular firms, including I think one of them which has a particular problem, like Marks and Spencer or someone, which apparently they even bring in their sandwiches from Britain. But anyway, let's move on. He said basically the extrapolations, when you look at them in the wider context, are certainly open for discussion. They said they didn't take in the growth in the trade going south. It didn't take in the growth of the trade going now to Europe that Northern Ireland is uniquely placed for. And it says the authors, there's a couple of other things. They said the Northern Ireland, the fact that they could go both to Britain and to Europe, that down the track, the benefits of this would be so much greater. So they said that the journal basically said when it was finished that the case was clearly unproven, and that Jeffrey really shouldn't be using this sort of comment that is costing 2.5 million a day, because the evidence isn't there to support it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, it's a good example of research. Research indicates, well, yes, of course, this research, but then look at the kind of research it was. We tend to accept the thing. People say, oh, researchers say such and such a thing. But Jim Alistair was on Radio Ulster this morning, Radio 6 Counties, and he was reminded by, Jeffrey was reminded by Jim Alistair that I think it was last September that with other unionists, he'd made a sort of a solemn pact to get rid of the protocol. He was going to get rid of the protocol. That was it. Nolan played several times a clip where he later said that he believed in the best of both worlds. He wanted a sort of protocol, but he believed in the best of both worlds. So he clearly is inching away from this hard stance that he took. And he's agreeing that he's aware of that. Farmers, businessmen, this is good for them. And a hard protocol, a hard border, it just will destroy some of these people. So they are getting the best of both worlds. Jeffrey's inching towards accepting it. The question is, as he does so, and Nolan pointed this out, how will he cope with some of the people in his own party, like Ian Paisley and Sammy Davis?
There's no, firstly, the one thing I should have said earlier on, there are no official figures to back up this 2.5 million. So it is purely speculative. The other thing is, Jude, I wasn't it the last day there was a survey done by somebody or other, and amongst all these surveys, that the protocol was only a major issue for 1 in 10 unionists. Hardly, the big item that everybody thought it was. And of course, the other one, Jude, the constitutional position, let's say it for the umpteenth time. This claim, and you keep sort of half supporting it, but I don't, this sort of thing. The constitutional position does not change one iota with the protocol.
I agree with that, Pat. I don't agree. I don't disagree with you on that. It doesn't change until the vote's taken here.
Exactly. So this throwing out this thing, Nicola Sturgeon is on the record saying she would kill for what Northern Ireland has. Yeah.
So the reason you're saying that I'm sort of half agreeing with it is I'm aware of the fact that economic unity, and again, Ray Bassett I thought sidestepped this on Wednesday. Economic unity encourages thoughts of political unity. That's a fact. You begin to ask yourself, why am I having this duplication? It doesn't make sense.
But with respect, let me cut across you. If the unionist population said we have the best of both worlds, and we can go into the UK, no bother, and we can go to Europe, no bother, and to use your term, to sell this sort of nirvana to the soft nationalists. We're having the best of both worlds. Economically, we're on and hey, this is a liberal place now. It's a place you can be Irish, or you can be British, or you can be both. Hey, come on, the old British system suits us. Do you not think that would be an easy sell, instead of the bigotry and the sort of, Ulster is British, and let's put up a border, and you Irish people bugger off. Yeah,
actually, when you think about it, I think you're absolutely right. When you think about it, it's almost, the protocol is almost an argument in favor of the continued existence of Northern Ireland, because we're getting the best of both worlds. If we become part of a united Ireland within the EU, we no longer would have that both worlds thing. But again, Alex Kane said this.
But the old unionists have a great habit, and I'm being patronising here, of getting defeat from the jaws of victory. Remember after the Good Friday Agreement, what do you call him, Trumbull, far from saying, "Look, we've got this, we got this, we got this."
Oh, yeah.
He went negative. He went, we didn't sell out in this, and they, all the rest of it. It was stupid. He should have said, "We have guaranteed the status of Northern Ireland. That we've guaranteed consent. There can be no change. Article 2 and 3 is gone." None of that. He went negative.
But anyway, you could understand that. I could understand that too.
No,
because the fact is,
as a 1-1-1. We're here.
But put yourself in his shoes, or put yourself in the shoes of the average unionist.
Yeah.
As far as they were concerned, here was Trimble agreeing to having people in government who were trying to upend the state and kill people.
Yeah, but he had no choice.
See, that's the way they looked at it. So you can understand them being a bit on the defensive side.
Yeah, but I mean, but they're going to have David McCullough of RT's famous one to Gavin Robinson. You have messed up on the protocol. You have messed up on Brexit. You've messed up on the border. Are you people working for the guy? I'm like, Jude, it was the best question I've ever heard asked.
Yeah. Okay, let's leave that one and move to one that I spotted this morning in the Irish Times. I don't think you got a chance to see it. It's an article by Michael D. Higgins, or maybe it's an interview with him. Yeah. And what he's doing essentially is saying there is such a pressing need for integrated education in Northern Ireland. He says it's terrible that we don't have it. It's holding people back. It's encouraging old prejudices, etc., etc., etc. What do you think of that line, Pat?
Jude, I met the principal of
Hazelwood,
Oak Grove Integrated Education, and she's a very impressive woman, Katrina. Probably, I can't remember her second name now. It's just gone out of my head, Katrina. Anyway, and a lot of what she said. She says integrated education is not about whether you're Protestant or Catholic. It's not about whether you're Hindu or anything else. It's about acceptance of all difference in life. And she says, we're not here to sell a particular brand of anything. It's acceptance of, I thought it was quite a good idea. Jude, Gregory Campbell one time said to me, and I thought it was a good point too, if you're sitting beside a fella at 2 o'clock, and he's a Protestant and you're a Catholic, it's highly unlikely you'll be throwing a petrol bomb at his house at 5 o'clock, because you get to know him and you know his family and so on. So he said, and now Gregory wasn't sort of patting, Gregory's no left-leaning liberal, but he was sort of saying maybe in the long term it would be better if, rather than having this segregated education down that track. Now, I knew an old, very wise man who used to be Frank Corn, who was editor of the Journal before me, and he said, Pat, someone, you can have integrated education all day, but he says, see, when the people go home to their tribe, as it were, like somebody goes back to Irish Street, or somebody goes back to the Bogside or Shankill Road or wherever it is. He says they're going to go back into their encampment, and the wagons are going to be circled, and the same old thing is going to happen again. So you can have as much integrated education all day; it's still not going to change much.
Yes, I agree with you. Every time the effect of schooling is trumped always by the home environment. You're more influenced by your brothers and sisters and neighbors and parents than you are by what happens in the school. I think Michael D's got a good point. It'd be, and the way you've described it too, it makes sense to say educate all kids together. Yeah. But I have certain misgivings about it, serious misgivings. One of them is this. People say integrated education is good because it stops people being bigoted against each other. They see they're human beings, etc. Then you ask them, did you go to an integrated school? And they say, no. And you say, are you a bigot? No, I'm not a bigot. So it is possible not to go to an integrated school and still not be a bigot. So you need to watch that they don't overclaim.
And I presume the reversal is also true. Jude, you could go to an integrated school and come out a bit bigger.
Exactly. I mean, you could argue that there's been an awful lot of graduates of integrated schools over the years here, over the decades, and it hasn't changed much in terms of society. The other thing is this. I'm a practicing Catholic, and I can see the argument for saying Catholic schools, which would continue for your children the sort of view of life that you have if you take your Catholicism seriously. I think there's a catch with that, and that is that many of the teachers in Catholic schools, I may get lynched for this, but I believe it. Many of the teachers in Catholic schools aren't really practicing Catholics. They don't really subscribe to Catholicism.
No.
They're Catholic in origin, so to speak, but they're not Catholic at the moment, at the present time. So that notion of creating a Catholic world within the school, which continues the Catholic world that's in the home, it doesn't stand up to much scrutiny.
No, it doesn't.
The last point I'll make is this. Do parents really want it? Now, all the surveys say, and Michael D quotes from 70%, 80% of parents when asked say, we would like to have integrated education for our children. And then where do they send their children? They send them to Catholic schools and they send them to controlled schools. Protestant schools, in other words. So it's dubious whether or not the majority of people, maybe they're voting with their feet, would you say, rather than anything else?
Yeah, well, I know a school principal, and he says most people like to stay within their own tribe. That's was how he described it.
Well, it's not, Charles. I suppose it's hard. As I say, I'm torn in it. I mean, I think the idea of meeting with people like yourself who are from an opposite tradition, shall we say, it's not religion anymore. It's a kind of tradition. I think that's good. I would worry that I'd be worried about schools where there'd be a predominant. For example, I know for a fact in many Protestant schools, well, they would say we're not Protestant, we're controlled schools.
Yeah.
Because I've been in, I know there's an atmosphere of Britishness there. And on the other hand, in many of the Catholic schools, there's a certain atmosphere of nationalism there.
Yeah.
So you have to take that into account in terms of what you said.
Jude, years ago, I was in a school for about all of 10 minutes, a wee sort of controlled school. And there was definitely, I think as far as I remember, Jude, there's a long time, it was 30 plus years ago, there was a portrait of the Queen up on the wall, as far as I remember. And there were definitely other symbols, I think I remember Union Jacks and so on. And I remember, like, I've been in a couple of, not a massive amount, I'm not a big school visitor, but I remember being in a couple of schools where in the National Series where I saw writing on the wall, Ask Gaeilge, Irish on the wall, 100,000 welcomes or something, in Irish, get Mila Falcha or something like that. And you're dead right. It's simple, it's small things, but you're aware of them.
Well, I know what is it? I forget what the school is. There's a school in East Belfast, a big, I think it's a grammar school actually, controlled grammar school. And as you go in, there's in every language you can think of, there's welcome and French, German, Chinese, a lot. Yeah. Not in Irish. No Irish. No. They don't want you. Now, they may have changed since I went in, but they didn't have it then. I was saying I noticed that Irish was prominent by its significant by its absence.
By its absence.
Incidentally, I go back just very briefly before we'll stop to that thing about the Israel Jews. You've seen Annie Hall, have you? That movie, Annie Hall.
No, I'm not a big fan of Woody Allen. I know you love him.
Oh, I love him. I watched it again last night. We watched it. I was killing myself laughing. There's a line in it where he says, he's going into the scan. He says, that guy, that guy, George Smith, we'll call him. George Smith, he hates Jews. He doesn't, he's anti-Semitic. And the guy said, what are you talking about? George Smith isn't like that. Yes, he is. I said, what, prove it. And Woody says, well, I was talking to him yesterday and I asked him, have you eaten yet? And he says, no, Jew.
Yeah, I know. That's like the old one from childhood. What time's the bus due? And F off, you Irish bollocks.
Okay, one task left just, Pat, before we part, and that is some of our one of our two fans has said we're forgetting about the toilet tinkler of the week. That's a serious issue. I want to put forward my candidate for that. And my candidate is Sammy Wilson. And the reason is that Sammy Wilson has said recently there are something like 160 pieces of research which indicate that wearing a mask doesn't help really at all in terms of avoiding COVID.
Yeah.
And there was a medical scientist came on shortly afterwards, and he says, of course it protects people. Why do you think they're wearing masks in operating theaters?
Yeah.
So there's Sammy, once again, flying. He is a climate denier, of course, climate crisis
Yeah.
denier. So I award you solemnly Toilet Tinkler of the Week, Sammy Wilson. I'm sorry for calling you Sammy Davis.
Hey, Jude, funny you should say it. There was a discussion on yesterday. I usually in the morning I alternate between News Talk and RT. And there was a Professor Luke O'Neill on yesterday morning.
Oh, he's a great guy, that. Yeah.
He's a brilliant guy. And he said, without question, he says, masks work. No, he says, they have to be worn properly and they have to be of sufficient quality. But he says, masks work. And somebody said, much like you're after saying, he says, well, with great respect, he sort of said, look, why do you think they wear them during operations? He says, if you think masks don't work, go and tell your surgeon not to wear a mask the next time you're having an operation.
Yeah. Silly. But anyway, with that.
Tinkler of the Week. All right, I'll give you that one.
And we'll leave Sammy garlanded with the wreaths of victory as Toilet
Tinkler of the Week.
Okay, Pat. All the best.
All the best, Jude.